This is Bree Garrell, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a Mellon Grant-sponsored series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, graduate students and everyone in between, culture workers and political organizers, in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. Today's conversation is with Dr. Willie Jamaal Wright, who is a research fellow within the Institute of Urban and Regional Research and Planning at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. His research interests include the study of urban and Black geographies throughout the Black Diaspora. His writing has appeared in the Annals of the American Association of Geographers, The Black Scholar, City and Society, and has been supported by the Ford Foundation, the Urban Studies Foundation, and the Andy Warhol Foundation. He is currently co-editing the late geographer Bobby M. Wilson's Consumer Political Economy in African America for the University of Georgia Press. Lastly, Dr. Wright is working on his first sole-authored text, Valorizing the Void, Place and Public Art in the Houston's Third Ward. In our conversation, we discuss Black geographies as an emerging field in Black studies, Black studies as life studies, and Black studies as a place of refuge for Black students. Hi, Dr. Wright. How are you doing today?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing great. We're very happy to have you on the Black Studies Podcast today and excited to learn more about you and your work. So we can jump right in if that's okay. I wanted to ask, what questions in the study of Black life intrigue you and guide your thinking, as well as your writing and scholarship? We'll talk a little bit about how this relates to Black studies as a field a little bit later, but I wanted to kind of give you the space to narrate your intellectual journey a bit and discuss what led you to Black studies.
Okay. If you don't mind, I'll start with the journey and pivot to the questions.
Sounds
Because
great.
the journey is so essential. This question had me thinking about years past and experiences and people who I was fortunate and blessed to meet and have guide me. So I'm originally from Houston, Texas, born and raised there. Did my undergraduate studies at the University of Houston, which is located in Third Ward, a historically Black neighborhood. That neighborhood is also the home of Texas Southern University, a HBCU. So those two universities are a 5-minute drive, a stone's throw from one another. Entering University of Houston, initially I thought I wanted to study pharmacy,
Okay.
but I didn't have the skill set to handle the math and science, nor did I have the discipline to train myself to handle the math and science. So over time, a couple years of, bouncing about, I ended up majoring in communication disorders, which is speech therapy. And my minor was African American Studies. I came to minor in African American Studies because I guess it was maybe late in my first year, I started dating someone who was already affiliated with the African American Studies program at the University of Houston. And she took me to the department once because they had a computer lab in there. I think I was always complaining about, or at least gesturing to how the main library's computer lab was always full. And so she introduced me to the computer lab at AAS. And I just started going there to do work, there was never a feeling like I had to be a student in that program to use those services. The other students in the computer lab were always welcoming. And the chair of the department was the late Dr. James Conyers. And I say the same about Dr. Conyers. Like the very first time I met him, he treated me as if, I was his, you know what I'm saying?
Wow.
I recall reading something that James Baldwin wrote about being in France and seeing some Black folk from the U.S. and they looked at him like he belonged to them, like he was theirs. And that's kind of how Dr. Conyers treated me and others. So it became a safe haven for me. So I would just go there, socialize, do work. And then eventually I thought, maybe I'll take a class over in this program that I'm welcomed in and that I'm using these resources in. And so not long after that, I minored in AFM and just became a part of that community and that family there. But I'll say, like, as an undergraduate, I was like a fledgling. Like, I bounced around. I don't shy away from telling my undergraduate students that it took me 7 years to finish undergrad. Like, I went to the University of Houston, I fumbled around, got on academic probation, ended up going to Houston Community College for a little bit, before eventually making my way back to U of H main campus and finishing my studies. But a key aspect of me being able to matriculate through was being a part of AAS. I always say, like, Dr. Conyers and others, they encouraged us academically, but they just treated you like they saw your humanity, like they saw you as more than just a student. That, what I try to do with my students, like, I know you come into this classroom with a world of experiences, like troubles, desires and needs, and I try to let them know that I see you as as a person before just who's coming into this space in which we create into a classroom together. Um, and it was in AAS that I feel like I was the best of myself as a student. I actually got A's in those classes, and I was motivated. Uh, at the time, I remember taking a class with Dr. Elizabeth Brown Guillory, who was in the English department, a playwright. Uh, and for a final project, I did an analysis of Alice Childress's Wine in the Wilderness. And I really feel like that assignment was the first assignment I did where I was like, damn, I killed that. I did that. Like,
Wow.
when you finally understand the text and you're like, okay. And you can feel it in your body and you're really not anxious, you're really like eager to express to other people that you have some understanding. That's how I felt going into that final project. I dressed up, I put on like my button up, blue shirt and my tie. And I did well on that exam. And so that was like my introduction institutionally into African American studies. But I will say that Third Ward, being this historically Black neighborhood that has many important political and cultural institutions, whether that's Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church, which is in walking distance from the University of Houston, Muhammad Mosque 45, which is in Third Ward. There's a National Black United Front, headquarters in Third Ward. The SHAPE Community Center, which stands for Self-Help for African People Through Education Community Center, has been there since the 60s. So living in Third Ward, I was ensconced in Black study. I was ensconced in this Black political and cultural legacy that, as much as Dr. Conyers or Dr. Brown Guillory were inspiring me, right? Being in that neighborhood, going and being able to see Brother Deloyd Parker at SHAPE or Rick Lowe over at Project Row Houses, which is also in Third Ward. I was just surrounded by legacy all the time. And so like those two trains kind of pushed me forward. Did you have a question? Okay. Uh, and then from there, after I graduated, I took a year off, went to New Orleans, and I was working at a boys' home in New Orleans. But I would always visit Dr. Conyers when I came home on like little breaks or, again, excursions. And one time when I was visiting, Dr. Conyers told me that Dr. Teresa Rajak Talley, who then was the chair of Pan-African Studies at the University of Louisville, was coming to town in a couple of days to speak about their program. And he's like, you might, if you're going to be around, you might want to come and listen to her. So I did. I came back. I listened to Dr. Rajak Talley. And in essence, she was making her pitch for students to apply to join the master's program there at the University of Louisville, which I was then calling University. Well, I say Louisville now, but then I was saying Louisville. Uh, and so I thought about it a bit because I had no understanding of what grad school was. I had I had RAs when I was in undergrad, but I never went to see them. So I didn't have a sense of what they did for themselves and what they could have did for me. But eventually I did apply and I got accepted into the master's program at Pan African Studies at University of Louisville. And by that point, I was living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, working on a farm, an organic farm.
Whoa.
Uh, and so I'd like packed up from Albuquerque and drove I-10 east, stopped in Houston, stopped in New Orleans, and then made my way north up to Louisville, where I started a master's program. And it was a completely different world. Like, I always say going into a graduate program, that first year is like you're breaking China stage. You're just like an elephant in a China shop, breaking stuff, doing all kinds of faux pas and stuff, intellectual faux pas and stuff. Um, and so I eventually would work with Dr. Teresa Rajek Talley and her husband, Clarence Talley, who was a professor in sociology there at University of Louisville. Uh, and though it was challenging, it was the best way, at least for me, to enter graduate school because I was in a Pan African Studies department. Uh, Vast majority of my professors were Black or African descendant folk, um, as were my colleagues, the other students around me. And I got to meet and study with individuals like Dr. Kyla Story, Dr. Ricky Jones, excuse me, and Professor Jan Carew. Actually, like my first year, my graduate assistantship was to work with Professor Carew, who was emeritus professor. Um, I don't know, man. Professor Carew, I say that I was blessed to have a father growing up who loved me the best way he knew how. And in his stead, I've had many father figures as well, and Professor Carew was one of them. Dr. Clarence Talley was another. Professor Carew was born in British Guyana in 1920. He was born in a small town of Agricola in the rainforest. So erudite, beautiful man. And I say he had a command of the English language. Like Professor Carew would use words that I knew, but he would use them in ways that I would never think to apply them in a sentence. Like he just knew he knew the ins and outs of words and how to apply them in these beautiful ways. And so he was suffering from Parkinson's at the time, so his mobility wasn't his brain was sharp as ever, but his mobility was not. So I would assist him in typing up whatever book he was working on, responding to friends and colleagues via email, and just listening to stories and stories and stories. Like Professor Carew, he wrote a book about meeting Malcolm in London. Malcolm visited London. Professor Carew was his guide and to some extent his bodyguard during that time. And he wrote a book called Ghost in Our Blood about that time with Malcolm those few days. So I was fortunate to be around these scholars. And again, as I say, they challenged me, they chastised me, but they loved me. And I knew that. I knew that they cared about me. So even when, I got called out, which I did at various times amongst my peers, I knew that, you know, it was kinda like the end of The Wine in the Wilderness when Tommy says to, Bill, he's like, "They call you nigger, but they hate you. I call you nigger, but I love you." Like, they didn't ever call me that, but it was like, that in that
Mhm.
text, she's saying that like, "Yeah, I'm on your ass. I'm on you, but I love you," and it was a similar experience there, and so coming from working on a farm in Albuquerque, before that, I started learning how to garden in Houston at Project Row Houses when they had a garden there. And then at some point I learned about a class action lawsuit that Black farmers had levied against the USDA known as Pickford v. Glickman, 1999. So these farmers had come together and argued that the USDA was institutionally racist, right? And because of that, many farmers had lost their land, had lost their livelihood, and they were seeking financial remuneration. And I wanted to understand more. I wanted to understand that at the kind of Kentucky level. So my master's thesis was a study of land loss amongst Black farmers and landowners in Eastern Kentucky. Uh, I had no idea how to do field work, and no one told me how to do it. No one taught me how to do it. I knew I had to get through my social anxiety or like me being an introvert and just go out there. Somehow I learned that Kentucky State University at HBCU in Lexington had an annual meeting of Black farmers, and I went to that meeting and just sat down and started talking to mostly older Black men. The average age of Black farmers in the US is between 55 and 60. And, having to give them this pitch of like, "Hey, I'm a grad student at University of Louisville. I do this research project on Black farmers and land loss." And some said no, but some said yes, and that's all you need is a few to say yes.
Mhm.
And that started the snowball sample of, meeting and traveling to Black farmers' land in Eastern Kentucky. I'm on these rural back roads on the weekends and stuff, and you're interviewing individuals. And so I had this drive to want to know more about Black social life and understand not just the struggles, but how we subsist and make life otherwise, is how I sometimes refer to it as. But looking back, I didn't. I had the drive and the desire to know and understand and study, but I didn't know how to write per se.
Mm.
And this is something that Dr. Clarence Talley, the ancestor that he is today, flat out told me one day. I gave him a draft of my thesis, that I struggled and labored over, and I knew it wasn't pretty. I knew it wasn't perfect. I knew there was some fluff in there because at the time, I was still in that kinda mindset of, like, I need a certain amount of pages for this to look like a thing,
Mhm.
as opposed to just and that's what I tell my grad students. I say, "Man, your final paper is not meant to be it's not gonna be done. You just have a deadline that you have to submit to." And so just view that paper, your thesis, your dissertation even, as an exercise in thought, you know? But anyways, I gave it to Dr. Talley, and then we had a meeting, like, the next week. I went to his office, and I could tell by the way he looked at me when I walked in his office that he was not satisfied, let's just say that. Uh, and I say this with love for Dr. Talley, like, this is not me
Yeah.
saying anything mean about him. Dr. Talley looked at me and he said, and I quote, "How did you get to grad school not knowing how to write?"
Oh.
And and me, my retort was, and I quote, "I don't know." I don't know. I don't know, which looking back on it, I think I thought, and maybe this was the nature of university settings to some extent, that I was supposed to learn how to write in English class in high school
Mm.
and in college, and, like, it was in those disciplines that I would learn how to write as opposed to that I could improve myself as a writer in every class.
Mm.
And so I do that with my undergrads, like, when they have assignments, I give them I give them the prompt. I was like, "If you rock with this prompt, you will do well. Not only will you do well in terms of the grade, but you will gather some understanding from this text and be able to contribute to our conversation." Like, I'm not trying to trip you up. Like, "Here, this is what you need, and you could take this model to your other classes and your other readings." Yeah. But I didn't have that. I was just, tweaking the the font and all that, trying to make it look like the paper was longer than it was, all that jazz. But anyways, yeah, that was, it was a beautiful experience. Like, I was super, super grateful to be, present and at the feet of many of these scholars, many of whom are still teaching and writing today. Dr. Story just came out with a book last year. Um, and so from there, after I graduated in 2010, uh, I still don't remember exactly how I found this research assistant position. But I saw it advertised maybe on some kind of, because I was still really interested in food and farming, and I wanted to dig more into that. I even envisioned myself maybe even going back to work on a farm. Like, it wasn't part of I had no plans of, like, matriculating further into academia, getting a PhD, being a professor. Like, I was not thinking that. I was like, "Okay, I did my master's. Let me go back and grow foods again." Like, that's my passion. I'm good at I love that. That feeds me. But in the process, I learned about this project that two anthropology professors at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, were doing on the food and agricultural systems across 4 regions of North Carolina. And those professors were Dr. Don Nonini, who's now retired, and the late Dr. Dorothy Holland, Dottie Holland. I applied for that position and I got it. It was a 20-month project. 12 of those 20 months, I was living in Eastern North Carolina, particularly specifically in the town of Rocky Mount, the Edgecombe County side, I'll say for anyone who's in the know. Rocky Mount is split between Nash and Edgecombe County. And Edgecombe County is seen as the black side, the less developed side of the town. So I lived in Rocky Mount for a year, researching local food systems out there. So that included farmers markets, community gardens, church gardens, food banks. It even included the Caledonia Prison Farm, which is in Halifax County, directly north of Edgecombe and Nash counties, where they had a large chicken CAFO operation, confined animal feeding operation, whereby through which they were producing eggs. They had a large food canning operation at that prison farm. Yeah, and it's still in operation to today, Caledonia. Through that process, I also learned that the exit they donate to food banks throughout the state of North Carolina. So, you know, learning how that prison farm was intertwined to what one might consider local food systems, or kind of challenge how we envision local food systems.
Mhm.
Uh, during that time, I went to a community meeting somewhere. It may have been Warrington, North Carolina. I think it was Warrington, North Carolina. And I met 2 graduate students who were in the Department of Geography at UNC. One of whom is Tim Stallman. At the time, he was a master's student. He's a critical cartographer. So he makes maps, but he presents them to a critical bent, a critical eye to cartography and map making. Very talented. And the other was Dr. Pavita Vasudevan, who's now assistant professor in the Department of African and African American Studies, or African Diaspora Studies, at University of Texas, Austin. Uh, and I met them and I told them that I was considering PhD programs. It was towards the end of that project. And then that time, my mind that I could only study the social world through sociology and anthropology. Like those are the only social science disciplines that will allow me to study race, per
Mhm.
se. And they told me, they were like, I think it was Pavi who said this. It was either Pavi or Tim, obviously. They're like, "Oh man, why don't you apply to the geography department? You can study whatever you want. You can study whatever you want in geography." And by that they meant geography is I say it's like a pre-disciplinary discipline, right? It was the practice of colonial powers, right? Those who were traversing the world, colonizing. They were ecologists, they were anthropologists, they were botanists, they were chemists, you know, and then to some extent, geography then and to this day incorporates many of those uh, kind of skill sets, right? You have geographers, most when I tell people I teach or I study geography, or they ask me, do I make maps, right? Because that is our imagination when it comes to geography. But in the field, that's physical geography, right? But physical geography also includes water flow analysis. It also includes tree ring analysis, you know, all different types of statistical and satellite data that geographers are using, medical geographers who are studying the, disease vectors in different countries and whatnot, conservation, et cetera. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have human geographers who I say we incorporate the methods and to some extent the theories and thinking of that sociologists, anthropologists apply, but we apply them spatially. Like we intentionally think about, the relationship between people and place. So whereas anthropologists might study the Maasai, yeah, we'll study the Maasai as well, and we might do field work, and we might be there for a year or more. But we think intently about what is the relationship between the Maasai and the kind of physical terrain or the cultural geography around them. So I entered that department in the fall of 2022, entering another, bull in a china shop stage of like fumbling around. I remember I had co-advisors, one of whom was Alvaro Reyes, who had finished his PhD in the lit department at Duke University, while under the tutelage of, oh my God, there's no reason for me to not remember this brother's name. He wrote In the Break.
Oh, Fred Moulton?
Exactly. Under the tutelage of Fred Moten. So Alvaro, Colombian American cat, brilliant thinker, and was trained and versed in the intellectual kind of Black radical tradition. My other co-advisor was Alta Cravey, who studied US Mexican transnational relationships, so she didn't study anything about Black studies or the Black radical tradition, but she was a mentor, you know, and by that I meant that I could go to Alta if I was like struggling with something and she would listen to me, or if I needed a letter of recommendation for something I was applying for, I could go to Alta. Alvaro was yo, these are the schools of thinking and like Black critical thought right now. You need to go read these books. If you want to be in conversation with, critical Black scholars today or where Black studies is going today, you need to go read these texts. You need to go engage these texts. So not just read, but you need to engage these texts. And after you've done that, yeah, all right, come see me. That was that was his style. Uh, so I went into the geography department, still thinking I was going to do work on Black farmers and land. Excuse me. Um, and that all changed for two reasons. One, many of my, colleagues, students at the time were coming from or studying, doing work in like Colombia, Brazil, other parts of, Southern and Central America where the conversation isn't so much about land as much as it is about territory.
Mm,
Territorial control, territorial transgressions, like, state invasion and state violence upon one's territory. And so I was like, why are they talking about territory? And by we, I'm thinking those of us who are interested in Black farmers, Black land, or whatever. Like, why are we talking about land and down further south, they're talking about territory? So that was in my mind. And then again, I went home. I went home. It might have been a Christmas break or one of those breaks. I went home to Houston. And as was customary, I went to go see Dr. Conyers, you know?
wow.
Like I'm in this geography department, which I thought I remember when kind of taking a step back when I told him I got accepted to the geography department, I was kind of scared to tell him because I was leaving Black studies, institutionally. I did a minor in Black studies. I did a master's in Pan African studies through his connection and his guidance. And then I went to geography. And I remember telling him that, and he was, per usual, he was proud of me. He was excited for me. And he told me, he's like, actually, he said, you're good. He's like, the university is becoming more interdisciplinary. So by going into a geography program, like you're setting yourself up to be able to navigate the university as it's becoming.
Mm,
And so, came home, I spoke to Dr. Conyers. I said, I'm trying to figure out a dissertation topic. I'm stressed out now because yeah, everybody seems to know what they want to do. I gotta come up with something, and it's gotta be hot. And I told him how I was thinking about territory because a lot of my other classmates were thinking about territory and stuff. And he asked me, he's like, he said, "Have you ever heard of Republic of New Africa?" And that opened up something new to me. I never heard of the RNA. Provisional Republic of New Africa formed in Detroit in 1968 after the 1967 rebellion, uh, spurred by the brothers Imari and Gaidi Obadeli. And their desire and claim was their claim was that Black folk were a nation within a nation, as such, and we deserve territorial integrity and sovereignty. And they and their
mm,
fellow citizens believe that that territory should be within contiguous counties in the Deep South, the Black Belt, the then Black Belt. But he mentioned that to me, one, because I should say Dr. Conyers got his PhD from Temple. So he came of age in
Okay.
that Afrocentric
Mhm.
lane of Black studies, that Afrocentric tradition of Black studies. And for those of us who are aware about the history of not just Black studies, but Black studies at Temple, right? There was two trains running, the Afrocentric and then the Black radical tradition side, which tend to have a kind of more political economy analysis of things. Um, and so I'm bouncing a little bit. So as an undergrad, I was introduced to Afrocentrism. I read, I won't say I had to, I read Afrocentrism, the work of Molefi Asante and
Mhm.
others. I read Francis Cress Welsing uh, and others. God, there's a name who's escaping me, who was a good friend of Professor Crew, I learned once I was at Louisville. Um, it'll maybe come to me later. But anyway, so like my training was in African centered, Afrocentric realm of Black studies. And that continued to some extent at Louisville, even though Louisville, there was like a more variation of like approaches to Black studies and trainings. But anyways, Dr. Kanye was like, he mentioned it because Dr. Imari Obadeli, who also got his PhD at Temple, taught at Prairie View A&M University, HBCU, just about an hour, 45 minutes, an hour outside of Houston. He's like, hey, you might want to look into the Republic of New Africa. Uh, excuse me. So that may have been going into 2023. I started looking into the RNA. Not long after that, I learned about the late Mayor Chokwe Lumumba, who was a founding member of the Provisional Republic of New Africa, a native son of Detroit, uh, who moved his family to Jackson, Mississippi on the mandate of the RNA and NAPO, the New African People's Organization, thereafter. But I learned that he was running for mayor. And I was like, man,
Wow.
I was like, okay. I knew that, okay, the RNA was in my mind, okay, these are some Black people in the US who were thinking about and writing about, theorizing and actualizing in embodied practice the creation of territory and a nation. And then I learned about the late Shoka Lumumba running for mayor, and I was like, okay, it's coming together. I don't know where it's going per se, but I know like it's this is serendipitous. So I had a kind of inchoate idea of wanting to kind of trace the political and spatial legacy of the Republic of New Africa. Oh, this is what it came to be, the political and spatial legacy of the Republic of New Africa in Detroit and Jackson, Mississippi. Um, and in part that was inspired by reading Christian Davenport's book, How Social Movements Die, wherein the RNA took prominence as a case study. And I was just like, nah, I had this feeling and thinking that the RNA is not dead. um, so I embarked on a journey that included a multi-site ethnography in Detroit. I lived in Detroit for 7 months. And then I moved to Jackson, Mississippi immediately thereafter and lived there for 6 months. So I was employing an anthropological method of inquiry as as a student in the Department of Geography. So that was my kind of intellectual training that eventually led to me becoming employed in departments of geography and African American studies.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ray. I really appreciate you bringing us in on these key moments and really like drawing out and spatializing like how you're moving across the states and how your thinking it evolves in these different encounters. You taking us from that very moment of you being in the space of the Africana studies, like using their computer lab, being in community with folks, being mentored and kind of like taken in almost in like this, I see you and I care about you, and how that transforms and catapults you into these different opportunities and spaces. I appreciate you being so detailed. It also in just you speaking so highly to these relationships that have helped you along the way, the mentorship, the guidance, and this kind of simultaneous, like, the way in which your intellectual journey is being, you know, kind of molded not just by the people and the learning done in the institution, but like it is simultaneously informed by your passions that exist beyond this space, as well as like the cultural institutions that are kind of not shifting, but like empowering you to think otherwise and to think critically and to be very intentional, I guess, with your study of space and Black life and Black social life. And I have so many notes that I'm just thinking about. Even the moment where you were talking about your final project without the Alice Childress text, and just understanding in your body and like in that moment, like what that did for you, and thinking about how that allowed, not even allowed, but like pushed you to continue this kind of work, you know, um, going with the masters and even I think, and I'm not gonna be too long-winded, but I'm really fascinated just about how your relationship to land, like farming as a practice that you enjoy, like that as a passion that, like you were saying, like you were very interested in that as opposed to necessarily just jumping and continuing on to like master's, PhD, like that. Like those are things that happened with time, but like the passion always being there and seeing how those are interwoven into the projects that unfolded, right? For you in the master's program, thinking about land loss and ownership in Kentucky, and then even to the work that you did with the PhD. Um, Thank you so much for sharing. Oh, I'm really excited right now. So to move us forward a little bit, I I want to kind of get a sense of how you envision the field of Black studies. It has its origins in student, professor, and community activism, and has also established, expanded, and explored the idea of a Black intellectual tradition. So I'm curious to know how you see the meaning and purpose of the field and how it should negotiate its relationship between political impact and like the development of an intellectual expressive tradition.
Mm. So yeah, thinking about that, my introduction to Black studies was having knowledge of its historical creation as a program at San Francisco State University in '69 under the guidance of Nathan Hare. Uh, and it was, and I got, Donna Murch has a book that I really enjoy that goes into some of that history, Living for the City, that talks about, you know, Black study, what Robin D.G. Kelly has spoke of as Black study, right, beyond the university, as you stated, right? So community residents, organizers, along with students, meeting together to fill the gaps in the traditional canons of, English, history, sociology, and whatnot. And that Black studies at its inception had twofold mission, to one, like I stated, to fill the kind of intellectual gaps within the university, but also, right, to work towards the betterment of Black communities. And I believe that still is, or should be, its mission. Um, and then with regards to negotiating the relationship between political impact and the development of a kind of intellectual expression to tradition, I tend to believe that political impact or political engagement spurs intellectual development, spurs ideas. For many of us, our research is based on the political work of others or maybe ourselves as well. I think about Dr. Ruthie Gilmore, who for the bulk of her life, was doing organizing around prison abolition, and came to, I think Dr. Gilmore, Ruthie got her PhD some point in her 40s, I think it was. So and the research that she went on to do and that she is respected and known for, right? The germ of which was her and the organizing and that of those around her, her comrades. Um, so personally, I never approached my, I guess, my career or even my writing in the sense of like, which is more important. I always knew that my writing was inspired by kind of Black politics, and that's like, you could think of politics with a big P or just the politics of Black living and Black life. Uh,
Mhm.
like I was never really the kinda philosophical, I can just pull theory out of the ethos kind of person. It's like I'm walking down the street and I see something and I'm like, "Why is that like that? Like, when did that become like that?" And that the question takes root. And I go to bed with it, and I wake up with it, and I go to bed with it, and I wake up with it until I finally wrote something that I no longer want to read, like that kind of thing. So for me, I like to see the 2 as intertwined, at least in my own
Mhm.
work. I view my work as contributing to that twofold mission of Black studies of like, okay, filling these intellectual gaps within traditional canons and increasingly now area studies canons or the cognate fields, and wanting to and trying to make a contribution to the betterment of Black folks' lives. I love Black people. I say, you know, and I think I don't know what they say. Maybe the psychoanalysts say like your first love or whatever is your mom, but I think it's probably Black folk. Uh, and so that Black folk living their lives in various conditions, it inspires me, you know?
Thank you
Um,
so much. I'm so sorry.
uh, no, you're fine, you're fine. I think I will add, like, and as for, like, envisioning Black studies, I don't know, over the last couple years, I've been really interested or just thinking about this kinda trajectory of Black studies, as you mentioned early, like, having a very African-centered, Afrocentric, impulse. And now it's to the point where, in my opinion, I feel as though, or I think that Black studies is now being forwarded largely by the humanities of those who have been trained in the humanities, whether that's, history, English, uh, American studies, perhaps, uh, and that we're getting, what's the word I want to say? Insightful, but also there's an adjective I can't quite find, but they're producing scholarship that is inciting the field itself and just thought and critical thought, and that's through agreement and vehement disagreement. And I am of the feeling that even if it spurs vehement disagreement, it is making a contribution. It is like, you know, forwarding us or forcing others to labor against it or labor in their own lane to produce their own thought. And so there's something about, in my opinion, Black studies being forwarded in the current time by those who have been trained in the humanities that is, yeah, it's I don't really have like a sound thought on it. It is just an observation. Um, and I'm curious to see where this train continues, where it leads us. Because we have so many sounds, so many important scholars who I would suggest, and many others are that they are engaging in Black studies, but they are not trained in the field of Black studies, and nor are they stationed in the Department of Black Studies.
Mm.
And that's not a judgment. That is just an observation and trying to think about, what does that mean for Black studies now? What does that mean for what Black studies is becoming? You know,
Thank you so much. Those the kinda last few points that you made, particularly just observations, like you said, just about the trends in Black studies at the moment with who is or who you're noticing are, like, forwarding it, but also the kind of fact that folks are doing the work of Black studies, but not necessarily in Black studies departments or even knowing that they are possibly doing this work, right? And then having a kinda, like, I don't wanna say a formal, but, like, a formal recognition of, like, the tradition that you are operating within, to almost, like, I don't wanna say respect the lineage, but, like, respect the lineage and, like, be aware of it in that way. Folks those were 2 interesting points that I thought you brought up as observations, but, when you were speaking earlier in response to the question, and you were talking about, like, the political, um the political aspect or the political work of Black studies alongside the intellectual expressive work and how they're intertwined. I felt like that kind of your narrative of your journey really highlights that, um, especially because you in you telling your story, it's almost you're like you're saying, you're being inspired through your everyday living, through the passions, through what it is that inspires you, things that you're naturally just curious about through your day-to-day living, right? And then kinda going into the space of the academy and allowing that to allow you to continue indulging in these curiosities, kinda digging into these rabbit holes and or, like, even, like, sowing like, planting seeds, right?
Mm.
Bringing those into that space and kinda, like, using the different resources that you can to continue blossoming and blooming and then taking this to the spaces where it's needed, right? To have these conversations. I think that was really your your narrative kinda illustrates, I think, that how sometimes folks may feel there needs to be, like, a one or the other, but the fact that they are very simultaneously informed and need each other. Um, so I really appreciated that. Um, so thank you again.
Mhm.
So I'd like to move us on a little bit and think about, I guess, your work and your work's investments. Broadly speaking, your work is invested in Black placemaking, freedom struggles, and as I w we can go on to say, like, community-centered artistic practices.
Mhm.
Um, how do you see your work in relation to the past of Black studies then? And how does it open up new horizons or maybe expand on key elements in the field?
Yeah, I think, kinda referencing back to our conversation about the Republic of New Africa and that dissertation work, and that being grounded in a particular kinda, tradition of Black studies or, like that work of scholarship wasn't ensconced in, like, Afrocentrism, but, the individuals I was reading and about in archives and interviewing were, to some extent, many of whom had changed their names, to, Kiswahili, or Swahili names or Arabic names. They dress in a certain kind of way. I should say that, and I think my dissertation committee, my external committee member was Dr. Akinyele Umoja, who's uh, down in Georgia, in Atlanta. And I reached out to him because, I mean, I was in geography department. And though Alvaro, one of my co-advisors, was, brilliant, he didn't have he couldn't, he hadn't touched it. He didn't have that kind of connection to the history and the movement, and AK does. And so I reached out to him to be an external member of my committee. So just to say that, like, that was the beginnings of my scholarship and how it was still very, I would say, immediately attached to and connected to Black studies. And over time, it has meandered. Uh, the connection is there. It is, I mean, I always say, like, my lens, how I approach geography, the study of geography, is through the lens of Black studies. You know, when people ask that, age old and asinine question, if they still ask it, like, what can you do with a Black Studies degree? Well, it's kind of like geography. You can do what you want. You can do whatever you want. For me, Black Studies gives you a lens through which to go into law if you want to become an attorney. It gives you the lens to which to go into medicine. So you have an understanding of the history of the development of gynecology in the US, right? And
Mhm.
how it was, those advancements, quote unquote, were through, the brutalization of enslaved Black women. So it gives you a lens that you can take into whatever profession, or in my case, discipline. Uh, and so Black Studies is always at the forefront of my thinking. What became a challenge for me is like, how do I do that in geography? You know,
Mhm.
like how do I merge what I'm reading in Black Studies, whether that's coming out of like departments or just people who are doing Black Studies? How do I merge that with Doreen Massey, like feminist geographer from the UK. How do I marry that with, I don't know, Neil Smith and his studies of like gentrification and uneven development? Like I knew it was possible, but I had to figure out a way to conjoin these literatures and these schools of thought. And what has come out of that, and I should say, like I come in the aftermath of like other scholars, particularly Black scholars that were laying the, I say, representational groundwork and the intellectual groundwork for me to wrestle with my own ideas, right? More immediately, that's Dr. Catherine McKittrick, who's at Queen's College up in uh, Canada, and the late Dr. Clyde Woods, you know, and his beautiful book, Development Arrested, or he's, gives this long this kind of geographic history or historical geography is what we say of what one could call racialized uneven development, Mississippi Delta, right? And so them two laid this kind of groundwork for this swell of Black grad students and Black uh, professors in geography that we see today. Like they really opened the door in the aftermath of Ruthie, in the aftermath of Bobby Wilson, the late Bobby Wilson, who wrote about race and place and in Birmingham, right? He has this really beautiful book. I won't say beautiful, really important book called America's Johannesburg, right? Uh, in the aftermath of individuals like Harold Rose, like there were these geographers that were beginning to think about race and segregation in the 60s. And they were the kind of first of us, literally the first, only graduate student, many of whom were trained in undergrad at HBCUs in the South and then went to get their graduate training at PWIs in the Midwest and the North deliberately, right? Because it was intellectual and otherwise safer up that way. And so I'm meandering, but I say all that to come to the point that now in geography, there is this subfield known as Black geographies that comes out of the edited text, or the text that Catherine McKittrick and Clyde Woods edited, called uh, Black Geographies and the Politics of Place, you know, such that now we have tenure track lines in Black geographies. Like I said, we have a whole subfield. There's many publications, articles, and books. Uh, and even to the point where now I say that other disciplines, individuals who are thinking about Blackness and doing Black studies, and they're having their spatial turn, is what we say in geography, where they're beginning to think about, oh, like, what is the significance of space or geography to what I'm interested in? And they're looking towards Catherine McKittrick to help them tease out their ideas. And so for me, Black geographies is geography's contribution to Black studies. We were late, a little later in the game than sociology or whatnot. I think most people still lean towards sociology when they want to get some study or whatever understanding about race. Geography still is not, you know, at the forefront. But for me, there's a certain kind of amorphous nature about geography that allows us to produce critical thought in a way that perhaps other disciplines have yet to, embark upon.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciated you kind of illustrating for us how we get Black geographies because I feel like Black geographies, at least in my work or in the conversations I'm a part of, I feel like is very, I don't want to say everywhere, but it is very much like the new great
Mm,
way of thinking, right? To think about, to bring space into our analysis more critically and to think like more ecologically. I feel like those like that I've in my own studies I'm recognizing like wow, it really opens up your how you can analyze and think about yourself in relation to the world around you. Um so thank you for that, and I feel like our next question is going to build really nicely off of this, but we discussed your master's in Pan-African Studies and your PhD work in geography. So, and I feel like you've been touching on it a bit throughout the interview, but this is a chance for us to talk about a little, I
mhm.
guess, more explicitly. How do you see your disciplinary training from your MA and PhD in relation to the trajectory of your projects? And what impact did it have, or does it continue to have on your work? And I'm curious to ask, are you currently in a geography or Black studies department?
No, so right now, I am a research fellow in the Institute for Research and Regional Planning at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro.
Okay. Oh my gosh. Well, that's amazing. Um, but I will kind of reiterate those questions again, but
Mhm.
I'm really just curious to know how your disciplinary trainings from your MA and your PhD relate to your current projects, and how what is if you can talk to us a little bit about the impact that it has on your work, and I guess how it is impacting the work that you're doing in your current fellowship, and how that maybe relates to research, teaching.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Um, like, thinking about my training in Pan-African Studies and then my PhD work in geography. Working backward, being a geography department really made me think about methodology or method. I should say method, not necessarily methodology, but method. Um, everyone around me was like, "Oh, I'm going back to Columbia for a year." You know, my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Adam Bledsoe, whose work is with quilombos in Bahia in Brazil. He's going to Brazil for about to do field work. People are going all over the place, you know. So it was just as a human geographer, it was just understood that you go are likely going into the field, you know, to sit, with some community or at somebody's feet or whatnot, which is something that I did in my MA work. But I feel like, but I would say in my doctoral work, I actually read some works about method. I took a course with Dr. Carla Slocum in the anthropology department at UNC Chapel Hill, so I got to read about doing, ethnography. I got to read, just other about not just the practice of it, but like the affect of it. Like, what is it like to be in the field or talk to other people about being anxious about going into the field? Like, how do you break the ice? Like, or what mistakes did you make in the field? What do you omit?
Mhm.
All of those things was really helpful. Like, so having that class with Dr. Slocum, but also being able to be in conversation with Dottie Holland and Don Monini, those anthropologists as well, influenced me. And then I would also say about Black studies is that a beauty of Black studies, and it gets to something like I believe I said earlier, is that though it is being forwarded largely, in my opinion, by the humanities right now, it still has this very robust social scientific, methodological approach so that much of my work has some form of field work, interviewing, and archival studies. So I recently submitted a paper that was I gave as a plenary talk last year at the geography conference. And it was a paper, but I went to back to Detroit. I sat in the archives at Wayne State, you know, and it also has some interviews in it, and so I think and I wouldn't say this was like a intentional training. It's just something that I absorbed in one way or another, perhaps from reading particular people's work, whether that's Catherine McKittrick or Saidiya Hartman, these other scholars who are, deep in the archive, Marissa Fuentes or somebody, they're deep in the archives and they're interrogating and, engaging in their own methodological approach to analysis that taught me like, okay, maybe I should sit with the archive. Well, doing the RNA project, the Republican New Africa project required that I do archives. And then I did develop some kind of affinity for the archive, like having to have a routine, knowing when you're going to go, having your lunch, having a sweater, like, all of those things. So all that to say that Black studies, the part of the best of it is that, it can train you and encourage you to, employ a variety of methods to try to answer the question that you have. And so in the current time now, and I see that in my teaching too. So in geography, it's often that we will have to teach, depending on your department, one would have to teach world regional geography. So we're literally teaching about the quote unquote regions of the world or people in place. And these are large, oftentimes these are large or gen ed courses, Uh, but in Black studies, I feel like you could be a little more at times creative with your course creation. Like one of my favorite classes to teach that I developed this course after reading, God, it was Marcus Hunter and, I can't remember her name. I apologize. She's at, Georgetown. I could see her face. But they read their book Chocolate Cities.
Mhm.
And so I created a Chocolate Cities course. And it was just like, let's just read about
Wow.
these majority Black cities or these cities that are known as chocolate cities. Like, why was San Francisco a chocolate city or Detroit or New Orleans, And, I like that class because it's like, you could be, if you're on the Eastern Shore, you can start that class with Baltimore because it's germane to the students. They know Baltimore. Then you can jump from Baltimore all the way to Seattle and be like, well, at some point in time, Seattle had a thriving Black community. Jimi Hendrix is from Seattle, You can start with what they know, kind of a geography that they know and that maybe they take for granted, And then you can like shift them all over to another part of the country that maybe they're not familiar with or they're not familiar with in the way that they're about to learn about it.
Mm.
Uh, and so I don't know. I tell you I say everyone is a geographer because everything happens in place, in space.
Wow. I like that, and I, um I really like the fact that when you were talking about teaching, like, a geography course as opposed to, like, a Black studies course about geography, like, how there is a difference in kind of the orientation and also, like, how you can even approach this subject or the readings and things of that nature, which is really fascinating, but I feel like that is the beauty of Black studies, right? Even when you were talking about Black geographies and geography itself, um so thank you. I and I'm just thinking back to you talking about how method was, like, important and just, like and when you were I think it was during your PhD, like, just reading about method and the conversations about this, right? Like, not just being about how to do it, but, like, you're embodied in these actions, and what effects do that have on you? I felt like that was, what effects does that have on you? I feel like
Mhm.
that was, really fascinating to think about because that's, like, so self-reflexive, and I guess being in English and I guess just being in this space, I never thought about that for how social scientists go about doing their work in that way. Um, so thank you again. So moving onward, I wanted to ask, it's a big question, but, Over the past 5+ decades, what do you think Black Studies has done particularly well? And what do you think it has not done particularly well?
Hmm. Uh, I feel as though that, Black studies, or those of us who have come and lay roots in Black studies, have done a good job of institutionalization, you know? Black studies emerged as, like, inchoate discipline, you know? And now it's to the point which there are various universities, throughout the country that have Black studies, African American studies, Africana studies, Pan African studies, African diaspora studies departments and programs. Uh, I also feel as though, like, there's been so much seminal, amazing scholarship that has come through Black studies. Uh, Books that I, enjoy reading over and over again, and I look forward to seeing, like, and knowing and engage in the scholarship that continues to come out. In terms of what we have not done very well, um, I would think to say rem having a connection to the communities, with which we are amongst. Thinking about the origin of the first Black Studies program and it coming out of community and being beholden to, or responsible to, I say beholden to, responsible community, and being able to be touched, by community.
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't think that's necessarily an orientation for all, programs and departments. Uh, and I think to some extent it should be, one, because in many instances, like, there's people who know about my work who are far afield of the communities which I'm learning from, what I'm saying, and writing about. Like, I wonder, like, what would it be like to be a graduate student in a department where it's like part of your, like, just like you have to take X, Y, and Z classes to matriculate, you have to present your research at, like, West Side Community Center that's been in the neighborhood for 50, 60 years. Like, you have to go present your work there, just like you're gonna go present it at ASA, the Triple A's, NCBS, or whatnot. Like, what would that mean? Like, how would that shape a budding scholar, Like, what would that feel like to be in a department where that's just second nature? I don't know. Um, when I was at Louisville, it wasn't mandatory, but we had the opportunity to present at community center on the of, west side of Louisville. Um,
Mm.
so that's one thing, connection. Um, and then there was another idea that had just popped into my head, and it vanished just as quickly as it showed itself.
Well, I can respond. I This idea of just having opportunities to present the work that the scholarship or the research that graduate students or just students in general are doing in this space, and then taking that to like community centers or cultural centers, and like that it just almost blew my mind, and the idea of like that being just an aspect of a program or a department. I feel like that's a really grounding practice in grounding in the space. I feel like it really like grounds you in the space that you are occupying, and not just in like the enclosed environment of a university or whatever kind of academic institution, but like you recognize that like there it kind of is like the dissolving the separation.
Mhm,
And it also not only does it, like, spatially, but intellectually. Like, right, you're not just thinking like, you are thinking amongst and with people outside of this space, whether or not you're aware of it. And that there is this responsibility too,
mhm,
with the knowledge that you are attempting to put forth and build and share with people. I really like that idea. I hope that that becomes a thing more commonly
Yeah,
in
me too.
departments. Wow. So, how do you imagine the future of Black studies? We just talked about what you feel like is done well, what things can be improved, but how do you imagine the future of Black studies? Not that we're at like, where are we at? We're at half a century into the field, and also in a moment when identity based critical inquiry is under systemic attack. How do you how do you imagine the future of Black studies at this moment?
Well, given what you just stated, it's very clear that the future is going to be one of struggle
Mm,
institutionally.
mhm,
So I recently learned that the graduate program in Pan African Studies at the University of Louisville was being paused, quote unquote, paused, which could be the beginnings of just eradicating it outright. Uh, then learning through from Dr. Shante Reese that there at University of Texas, Austin, right, their department
mhm.
is being subsumed with other
Yes.
fields at that university. So it's very clear that, particularly at universities in the South, whether that's the Up South, Mid
Mm,
South, or Deep South, it's going to be an institutional struggle for to have a place in the institution. Something to which we perhaps have I won't say taken for granted, but didn't necessarily envision. Uh, yeah, I don't know. We didn't have to envision having to fight for. I know like many chairs and senior faculty, just to have to justify or give the metrics of what the department and program is doing. But now it's like it's almost to the point where those metrics and don't really matter, really.
mhm,
In some states, clearly they don't matter. Uh, so that's one aspect of the future. Uh, I would hope that that future, as I mentioned with your previous question, is like a future in which programs and departments like reconnect or connect themselves to the communities around them, not
mm,
solely, not just so that grad students and faculty would be presenting their works to the community, but that community could be a line of defense for these programs and departments too,
mhm,
right? Like it could be not just you reaching out to your colleagues and other universities to mount a defense, but like the community in that town and city also mounts a defense on the
mm,
behalf of that program and department because it is relevant, it is significant, it is connected. Um, and then, yeah, I think those are two things. I was thinking about something about Black study
mhm,
and But I guess those 2 things include, at least the latter part, being connected to the community includes Black study, I
mhm,
was I've yet to finish Joshua Meyer's text of Black study, but, it got me percolating of, all the ways in which Black study is being fomented or happening outside of the university, and I would even say as an extension of his text, outside of those who have degrees who are, perhaps meeting with
mm,
each other on, like to me, I'm walking down the street in the neighborhood and it's like some cat sitting underneath a shade tree or whatever. Like there's some Black study happening right there. If
mm,
I see somebody, a young woman doing her friend's hair on the porch, there's some Black study happening there, you know?
mhm,
Um, so the future of Black studies is always going to exist where there's Black social life popping off. Uh,
mm,
but we have labor ahead of us to make sure that it continues to have a home and a presence in these institutions, these universities and colleges.
mm,
Oh, and if I could, when you ask me about something we haven't done well,
mhm,
I don't know and let me know if I'm wrong, and even if there is, there are too few, in my opinion, Black studies programs, departments at HBCUs. And I don't know if the presumption is because that we're ensconced, like we're ingrained in one another spatially, that we don't need Black studies. But I, for one, am really be really curious, like what could happen, what could come from a Black Studies department emerging at a HBCU.
wow. I wasn't expecting that. That's actually really interesting. I'm gonna now look into that. Wow. Because when I do hear of, like, big premier Black studies programs, I don't think that they're housed at, or even departments, they're not housed at HBCUs, or at least those aren't the ones I'm hearing about. So I'm curious to
Howard
know
has
what
one, I'm
work.
sorry, excuse me.
Okay. So I'm curious to know them and just be interested in, like, how they're thinking about the attacks going on right now and the work that they're doing too. I think that would be fascinating to think with.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm so sorry that I don't wanna take us off on a tangent
Oh,
because
yeah, you're good. Tangents, have destinations.
yes. But in listening to you kinda just talk about how you imagine Black studies as always having this life, right? Because Black study and Black studies aren't confined to the institution. But thinking about our current moment, what are questions, or what questions do you think are most urgent for us to be asking and sitting with?
Um, I think I guess a question of sorts is whether or not whether or not we're preparing our students to be scholars or just academics.
Mm,
Um, Especially given what you just asked about and discussed in terms of the precarity. I mean, the precarity that existed before all this statewide legislation
mhm,
and federal attacks on Black studies.
mhm,
Academia was already a precarious location for ideas and employment, or employment and ideas.
mhm,
So are we producing scholars or producing academics? And like reference to the former, you know, I'm thinking of, I don't know, people who are committed to the kind of development and exchange of ideas, like no matter where they are, whether they're
mm,
at the R1, they're at the, liberal arts college, or they're at neither college nor university, you know. And I think about, what is this? I always butcher his name, but like the French thinker Alain Badiou, where he talks about are we producing people, or like having to have a fidelity to the event, as he would say, like, are we committed to that initial germ of an idea or of incitement, that led to a San Francisco state. And
mm,
we're producing scholars who are committed and have fidelity to the event.
mm,
The event is the explosive moment. And then afterwards comes institutionalization, comes, betrayal, comes disappointment, comes institutional advancement, and accommodations and that you never anticipated. But yeah, that's a question. Um, and then because I'm in a geography department, I would, this is maybe not so much a question, but just like, are we encouraging our students to think beyond Black studies? Like, what might that do for them as scholars, as writers, to read beyond? I remember Professor Carew, used to tell me two things. He said, writing is editing. And he would say, reading is writing. Like, the
mm,
more you read, the better writer you become. And he was a beautiful writer.
mm,
Um, and I just think there's so many benefits to thinking outside of our discipline and sitting with others outside our discipline. I was fortunate when I was at UNC. I had friends who are now colleagues. Orisami Burton was in the anthropology department when I was at UNC. We started the same year. He's at American Studies. He wrote the amazing book, Tip of the Spear. I met him at grad school orientation the first day. We met each other, and then we went and found a rooftop garden on one of the buildings and sat and chopped it up. That's how I learned that. That's how he learned that I did my master's in Pan African Studies. That I knew his parents because his mother taught in the Pan African. She taught drama, but she was affiliated with the Pan African Studies department at the University of Louisville. I think she's back at Howard now. So I met Ori when I was there. I met Candace Bimbo, who I took a class with her when I was at Duke. I took a class, instead of taking my advisor's class, I took a class with Eduardo Bonil Silva, which I paid for. in terms of conversations with my advisor. But hey, I didn't know I was a bull in a china shop. But I met people who are now friends and scholars in other fields and stuff, And so encouraging our students to be grounded in Black studies, but go out there and have conversation with other folk in other fields.
Mhm. Thank you so much. I think both of those questions are something that I'll continue to sit with, and I hope that other folks listening continue to. I appreciate the distinction between scholar and academic as different kind of roles and identities, and also this kind of encouragement to allow Black studies to be a lens, but not it to be like something that limits, but something that allows us to continue to be expansive and open and build these connections across different fields of thought, as opposed to this being the sole kind of way in which we can think or what we can think with. I think that is really necessary at this moment.
It's the beauty of Black studies. It started as a discipline to fill gaps, and now I feel like the thought coming out of Black studies is creating gaps. It's like
Mm.
creating voids. It's like, how do we answer that question? Because I read this amazing book that didn't end with an answer. It's like the void. So Black studies is it is creating black holes in thought.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I'm going to be returning back and listening to this because as you just said that, it was kind of to fill gaps, but now create it. I think that just speaks to the longevity and the
Mm-hmm.
vitality of Black studies, right?
Indeed.
Wow. I'm sorry, you can go ahead.
I'm good. Thank you.
But yes, wow, Dr. Wright, I appreciate you dropping so much knowledge and wisdom in our conversation today and taking the time out to just share so much with us here at the Black Studies Podcast.
I appreciate you following the impulse that led to the creation of this podcast and, putting yourself out there and inviting people, so we thank you.
Well, again, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on, and I hope you have a great day.
You do well. Take care.